Hello, and thank you for joining me for another important and timely episode of Hope is Kindled. Today's journey takes us into the courtroom and the conscience of a nation through the gripping, gut-wrenching pages of John Grisham's A Time to Kill. This is a story that forces us to confront the darkest parts of American history: racism, injustice, and violence, while also calling us to imagine a better, braver world. It is not an easy read, and it was never meant to be. Nor is it a comfortable film, but it is a necessary one. Because within its pages and scenes, we are called to wrestle with what justice truly means, and how far we would go to defend the innocent, to right a wrong, to challenge the system, and to find hope in the most impossible circumstances. Let us be clear from the outset, this episode condemns racism in all its forms. It condemns violence against children and against any human being. There is no room in the human spirit or in this podcast for hatred, for white supremacy, for racial terror. We confront these realities not to sensationalize them, but to name them, understand them, and defeat them through knowledge, through courage, and through the power of storytelling. John Grisham's A Time to Kill, published in 1989, was his first novel. Though it didn't initially receive much attention, the success of his later books led readers back to this one, and for good reason. It is arguably his most morally complex and emotionally raw work. It's set in the fictional town of Clanton, Mississippi, a Southern courtroom drama inspired by Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, but with a modern, explosive twist. The plot follows Carl Lee Hailey, a black father whose 10-year-old daughter, Tanya, is brutally assaulted by two white men. When the men are arrested and expected to go free or receive lenient punishment, Carl Lee takes justice into his own hands, killing them in a courthouse ambush with an M16 rifle. Carl Lee is then put on trial for murder, and he is defended by a young white lawyer, Jake Brigance, who faces enormous pressure, threats, and the moral weight of defending someone who clearly committed the act but, in the eyes of many, did so with reason. The 1996 film adaptation, directed by Joel Schumacher and starring Samuel L. Jackson, Matthew McConaughey, Sandra Bullock, Kevin Spacey, and Donald Sutherland, powerfully captures the tension of the Brad book. Jackson's performance as Carl Lee is unforgettable, trembling with fury and heartbreak, and McConaughey, in one of his earliest serious dramatic roles, delivers the now iconic courtroom monologue that asks the jury, and the audience, to close your eyes and now imagine she's white. The film ends not with victory, but with the bitter taste of relief. The justice system may have bent toward humanity in this case, but the brokenness beneath it remains. Hate has a history, and so does hope. The events of A Time to Kill are fictional, but Grisham based them on real experiences from his time as a young lawyer in Mississippi. And more disturbingly, Tanya's attack mirrors countless real-life cases, many of which ended without justice. Let us pause here to acknowledge historical truth. According to data from the Equal Justice Initiative and the Department of Justice, over 4,000 racial terror lynchings occurred in the American South between 1877 and 1950. Black children were victims in a significant number of unsolved crimes, particularly in the Jim Crow South, where white perpetrators were rarely prosecuted. Even today, according to the FBI's 2022 Hate Crime Statistics Report, Black Americans remain the most targeted racial group, accounting for over 56% of racially motivated hate crimes in the USS. In 2023 alone, the Southern Poverty Law Center tracked over 700 hate groups operating within the United States. These numbers are not just statistics, they are stories. They are children, fathers, daughters. They are Carl Lee's and Tanya's, whose pain too often goes unheard. Grisham gives them a voice. Not a perfect one, not a complete one, but one loud enough to force us to listen. Grisham's courtroom scenes reflect his experience practicing law in Mississippi. He crafts Jake Brigance's defense of Carl Lee around several key legal principles: the insanity defense. Jake argues that Carl Lee was temporarily insane, consumed by grief and trauma. Jury nullification. The case hinges on the hope that the jury will understand the motive and emotionally connect to Carl Lee if the law seems clear. Reasonable doubt. Jake points out the moral ambiguity of the moment, asking whether the jury themselves would have done the same. From a legal standpoint, this case touches on dangerous ground. It raises questions about vigilante justice and whether personal morality can, or should, supersede the rule of law. These are questions with no easy answers. But the brilliance of the narrative lies in its humanity. Jake's final argument isn't about law, it's about empathy. He doesn't just ask the jury to see Tonya as a victim, he asks them to see themselves as her parent. If you ever face a legal crisis, whether criminal, civil, or moral, always consult with a trained legal professional. Law is not something to be interpreted casually. Your life, your freedom, your future, these are things best handled with expertise and care. This podcast can help with reflection, but it cannot substitute for sound legal advice. So where do we find hope in a book so filled with violence, hatred, and anguish? We find it in Carl Lee's unwavering love for his daughter. We find it in Jake Briggs, a man who chooses courage over comfort. We find it in Ellen Rourke, Sandra Bullock's character, who risks her safety for justice. We find it in the jury, who, despite their biases and fears, are asked to see beyond rice and begin to try. And we find it in ourselves, as readers and viewers. We find it when we refuse to turn away from hard stories. We find it when we speak up against injustice, vote with conscience, love with open arms, and remember that no child should suffer and no human being should be defined by the color of their skin. There is no excuse for racism, there is no justification for hatred, and there is no greater calling than to rise above the fear, ignorance, and violence of our world and choose empathy instead. Grisham dares to ask us the hardest question of all. What would you have done? It is not an easy question, but it is the right one. A Time to Kill stands alongside the other powerful works we've explored in this series as a brutal, necessary mirror held up to society. Like To Kill a Mockingbird, it demands we examine justice not just as an abstract ideal, but as a lived experience shaped by race, class, and fear. Carl Lee Hailey echoes Tom Robinson. Both men are black fathers caught in systems not built to protect them. But where Atticus Finch operates with quiet dignity within the law, Jake Briggs must navigate the incendiary moral terrain of a father who took justice into his own hands. Together, these stories challenge us to see the legal system through both moral and emotional lenses. In Blood on the Forge, William Attaway gives voice to black laborers crushed under the weight of industry, migration, and systemic racism. The suffering in that novel is more ambient and generational, but no less devastating. While Carl Lee is on trial for one act of vengeance, Attaway's characters live on trial every day in a world that does not recognize their worth. Both stories ask, how long can people be denied justice before they break? Their eyes were watching. God explores the personal journey of Janie Crawford, a protagonist who, like Carl Lee, must find her voice in a world that tries to silence her. Janie's trials are emotional and internal, but they spring from similar soil, a society that polices identity, limits autonomy, and judges people by race and gender. Where Grisham offers a courtroom, Hurston offers a porch, but both become stages for truth to be spoken and dignity reclaimed. The teachings of Gandhi and Osho present a striking contrast. Gandhi's path of nonviolence urges us to seek justice through peace, even in the face of oppression. Carl Lee's actions raise difficult moral questions for Gandhi and thought: can violence ever be justified if the system offers no recourse? Osho, meanwhile, invites us to look within, to question our conditioning, and dissolve anger into awareness. Carl Lee's eruption may seem antithetical to Osho's teachings, yet it is rooted in deep Lovend, therein lies the bridge. As we discussed in our episode on Osho, sometimes the awakening begins not in peace, but in pain. Even Catch-22, with its absurdist critique of bureaucracy and war, reminds us that systems, whether military or judicial, are often illogical, circular, and dehumanizing. Carl Lee faces not just a jury, but a society whose laws often fail the very people they claim to protect. Yossarian, like Jake Briggs, comes to realize that survival requires resistance. All of these works, whether set in courtrooms, steel mills, porches, battlefields, or spiritual texts, are linked by a common thread: the fight to preserve humanity in the face of systems that erase it. A Time to Kill is not just about a trial. It is about the soul of a community and the moral courage it takes to challenge inherited injustice. If you have experienced injustice, or if you carry pain, I hope this episode reminds you that you are not alone. And if you have privilege, I hope this story reminds you to use it wisely, not in silence, but in service. Because hope doesn't just come from the courtroom. It comes from compassion. It comes from courage. And it comes from us. Next on Hope is Kindled, join me next time as we turn from the courtroom to the classroom and from Mississippi to Harlem for Wallace Thurman's The Blacker the Berry, a powerful story about identity, internalized prejudice, and the color line in America. Until then, good journey.